My parents lost their house and demanded to live with me forever, but a forgotten storage unit changed everything. The first time my mother said it, I thought she was joking. "You have the extra bedrooms," she said. "It only makes sense." My parents had just lost their home after falling behind on payments. The house I'd grown up in was gone. My younger sister, Rachel, lived in a tiny apartment with 2 kids. My older brother, Brian, lived across the country. That left me. I felt terrible for them. They were my parents. Of course, I was willing to help, but something about the way they spoke bothered me. Not, "Can we stay with you for a while?" Not, "Until we get back on our feet." They talked as if the decision had already been made, as if my house was simply becoming their new house. My father even started discussing where he wanted to put his furniture before I'd officially agreed. At first, I told myself they were scared. People facing a crisis sometimes act strangely. Still, a small part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, especially because their financial collapse had happened so suddenly. At least that's what they claimed. My parents had always presented themselves as responsible, careful, prepared. Then almost overnight, they were bankrupt. The explanation never fully made sense. My father blamed medical bills. My mother blamed inflation. Sometimes they blamed bad investments. The details kept changing. Whenever I asked questions, they became defensive. "You think we're lying?" my mother snapped once. "No," I said, but honestly, I wasn't sure. 2 weeks later, they moved into my guest rooms. They brought far more belongings than I expected. Boxes filled my garage. Furniture crowded every spare corner. It looked less like temporary housing and more like a permanent relocation. The first month was exhausting. My parents criticized everything: the way I organized my kitchen, the food I bought, the hours I worked. My father complained that I didn't mow the lawn often enough. My mother rearranged cabinets without asking. Every conversation felt like a battle over ownership. Then I noticed something strange. Despite supposedly being broke, they spent money constantly. Nothing extravagant, just endless small purchases: new clothes, restaurant meals, subscriptions, online shopping deliveries. I tried not to judge, but it didn't match the image of people who had lost everything. One evening, I asked where all the money was coming from. My father looked annoyed. "We still have some savings." The next week, he told Rachel they had no savings at all. I overheard it during a phone call. That contradiction stayed in my mind. Then another appeared. A collection agency called my cell phone looking for my father. I handed him the phone. His face went pale. When he hung up, he claimed it was a mistake. A few days later, another collector called. Different company, same reaction. Mistake again. At that point, I stopped believing in coincidences. I began paying closer attention, not spying, just noticing. The more I noticed, the less their story made sense. Then something happened that changed everything. A certified letter arrived. It was addressed to my father. He wasn't home. The envelope mentioned a storage facility. At first, I assumed it was junk mail. Then I saw the words "past due." When my father returned, I handed him the letter. The color drained from his face. For a second, genuine panic flashed across his expression. Then he forced a smile. "Oh, that old thing?" "What old thing?" "Storage unit." I frowned. "You have a storage unit?" "Forgot about it years ago." The explanation felt rehearsed, too quick, too smooth. My mother entered the room and immediately looked nervous when she saw the envelope. That reaction bothered me more than anything. People don't look terrified over forgotten furniture. A week later, another notice arrived. This one warned that the contents would be auctioned if payment wasn't made. My father became unusually agitated. He drove across town that same day. Afterward, he claimed everything was resolved. But now I was curious. Why would someone who supposedly lost their home prioritize an old storage unit? What could possibly be inside? A month passed. Then my father suffered a minor fall, nothing serious, but he asked me to retrieve some paperwork from his car. While searching, I found the storage unit contract. The facility was only 15 minutes away. The rental payments stretched back nearly 12 years. 12 years. You don't accidentally forget something you've paid for every month for 12 years. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, I asked my mother directly, "What was in the storage unit?" She froze, only for a moment, but I saw it. "Old family things." "What family things?" She turned away. "Just memories." The answer sounded hollow. The mystery should have ended there. It didn't. A few weeks later, another letter arrived. This time, it wasn't a bill. It was a notice of ownership verification. My father's name appeared alongside mine. At first, I thought it was an error. Then I realized what had happened. Years earlier, during a family move, he'd apparently listed me as an alternate contact. The facility needed signatures from both parties for some administrative update. My father was furious when he learned I'd seen the document, far more furious than the situation warranted. That reaction made my decision for me. I went to the facility. Legally, I was listed on the paperwork. The manager confirmed I had authorized access. The unit sat in the back row, a plain metal door, nothing special. I expected dusty furniture, old clothes, boxes of family junk. Instead, I found enough evidence to destroy my family. There were boxes everywhere. Most were labeled with dates. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then I opened one. Inside were bank statements, hundreds of them, different accounts. Different institutions, some belonged to my parents, others belonged to people I'd never heard of. I opened another box, tax records, property documents, legal correspondence. The deeper I looked, the stranger things became. Then I found a file bearing my name. My stomach dropped. Every financial record connected to me was inside. Loan applications, credit reports, employment records, even copies of documents I'd never given my parents. I sat on the concrete floor and started reading. Within 30 minutes, my entire understanding of my family collapsed. Years ago, my parents had secretly used my identity, not once, repeatedly. They had opened accounts using my information. Some had been closed, others remained active. The amounts weren't enormous individually, but together they represented tens of thousands of dollars. I felt physically sick. Then I found something even worse. There were files for Rachel, files for Brian, files for our late grandmother. They hadn't just used my identity. They'd used everyone's for years. I couldn't understand why. Then I found the ledger. A handwritten notebook, every transaction carefully recorded, every account tracked, every relative listed, page after page. The truth emerged slowly. My parents hadn't become financially desperate recently. They had been drowning for decades. Instead of admitting it, they'd hidden it. They borrowed from one account to pay another, opened new credit lines to cover old debts, used family members' identities whenever they ran out of options. The house loss wasn't a sudden tragedy. It was simply the final collapse of a scheme that had been failing for years. But the most painful discovery came near the end. There was a folder labeled House Transfer. Inside sat documents dated 8 years earlier. My grandmother had left money for all 3 grandchildren, me, Rachel, Brian. Not life-changing wealth, but enough for house down payments, enough to help build futures. I had never received a cent, neither had my siblings. According to the records, my parents had taken everything, every dollar. They'd forged signatures, moved funds, covered debts, then hidden the evidence. I stared at those papers for nearly an hour. Suddenly, countless childhood memories made sense. The mysterious financial emergencies, the constant borrowing, the secretive behavior. The arguments that stopped whenever kids entered the room. All of it. When I finally left the storage unit, I sat in my car and cried. Not because of the money, because the people I trusted most had spent years betraying everyone around them, including their own children. That evening, I called Rachel. Then Brian. Neither wanted to believe me until I sent photographs. The silence that followed was devastating. 3 days later, we confronted our parents together. Rachel cried. Brian shouted. I mostly listened. I wanted an explanation, a real one. For a long time, my parents denied everything. Then my father broke. The confession came in pieces, one terrible piece at a time. The first fraudulent account had been opened during a financial crisis nearly 20 years earlier. They intended to repay it. Then another crisis appeared, then another. Each lie required another lie, each debt required another debt. Eventually, they stopped seeing themselves as thieves. They saw themselves as survivors, people doing what they had to do. At least that's how they justified it. My mother kept repeating the same phrase. We were trying to protect the family. Rachel finally snapped. From who? You were the ones hurting us. My mother had no answer, neither did my father. What happened afterward was ugly. Lawyers became involved. Financial investigations followed. Relationships shattered. Some accounts were recovered, others weren't. The inheritance money was gone forever. Most had vanished years earlier. The biggest surprise came months later. During the investigation, we learned my parents still possessed substantial hidden assets. Not millions, but enough. Enough that they were never truly destitute. Enough that losing the house hadn't left them helpless. The storage unit contained evidence of that too. Investment accounts, certificates, property interests. They weren't broke. They were protecting what remained, and their plan had been simple. Move into my home permanently. Reduce their expenses to almost nothing. Preserve their hidden assets. Let me finance the rest of their lives. The realization hit harder than any financial betrayal because it explained everything. The entitlement, the assumptions, the lack of gratitude. They never saw themselves as guests. They saw me as part of the strategy. When I confronted my father about that, he didn't deny it. He just looked tired. We thought you'd help family. Family. The word felt different after that. A year later, my parents were living in a small apartment. They paid for themselves. Rachel barely spoke to them. Brian cut contact entirely. I maintained limited communication, mostly for practical reasons, but the relationship never recovered. Some wounds don't. The strangest part is that none of us would have discovered the truth if that storage unit hadn't nearly gone to auction. For over a decade, they kept every secret there. Every forged document, every stolen dollar, every lie. They hid it because they thought it was safe. Forgotten. Permanent. The same way they assumed their children would always be there to rescue them. Sometimes I think about that metal door. How ordinary it looked. How easily I could have ignored it. If that overdue notice had never arrived, my parents might still be living in my house today. And I would probably still believe they were victims of bad luck instead of architects of their own collapse. That's the part that still unsettles me. The betrayal wasn't hidden behind some elaborate criminal mastermind plan. It survived because the people who were being hurt trusted the wrong people and never thought to ask harder questions. A forgotten storage unit didn't destroy my family. It simply revealed what had been buried inside it all along.